Hello! Welcome to the podcast, There Is No Spoon. The metaphor of a mountain pass in the context of the midlife crisis has another interesting connotation. What do we associate mountains with? Undoubtedly, with meditation and withdrawal from the world. It's no coincidence that in many stories, people retreat to the mountains in search of wisdom. This doesn't mean that wisdom literally resides there, but down in the valley, where there are too many enticing distractions, it's hard to find a path to oneself. This question becomes especially relevant in the middle of life. Why is that? Because the first half of life is largely directed outward. Jung might describe this as the development of the ego-world axis. We enter the world and want to learn how to live in it. We grow, study, achieve our first independent goals, which are often not just our own desires, but rooted in sociocultural patterns. We do what others want from us, others in the broadest sense: parents, friends, society, the world. We run forward without pausing. Think about it. When does a normally developing person ever have time for themselves? In childhood, considering school and parents, a child spends nearly 100% of their time not alone. Then comes a bit more freedom, but people often fill it with social activities. And that's okay. There's a desire to try everything. Besides, one of the universal fears starts to rise with age: the fear of loneliness. Many have written about loneliness. Irvin Yalom identified this fear as one of the fundamental existential givens of being. But we are not speaking here exactly about loneliness. We need to dive a bit into his research and the semantics of the words. First, let's recall the classification proposed by Yalom. He divided loneliness into 3 types. The first one, interpersonal loneliness, is the most well-known kind, when we feel lonely due to a lack of sufficient social contact. This may be related to childhood issues or an objective situation like moving, which cuts one off from familiar relationships. But the fact remains: humans are social creatures. A lack of social contact, sufficient for that individual of course, is perceived negatively and causes distress. This can be treated, so to speak, fairly simply. Just increase the dose. If it's rooted in complexes, the underlying problem should be addressed. This is the most understandable type of loneliness in everyday life. The second type, intrapersonal loneliness, occurs when we are disconnected from a part of ourselves. For example, due to past trauma, we may avoid certain memories, or because of guilt or other complexes, we don't allow a part of our personality to exist. This can result in a sense of living a life that's not truly ours, and a subtle but persistent feeling that something within us needs to be heard. This type of loneliness, though more complex to articulate, can nevertheless be overcome through therapy or self-reflection, if there is willingness. The third type, existential loneliness, essentially refers to the fundamental and inherent separateness of the individual from the world and others. In a way, we are locked in our own private world. We can't transmit our exact vision of the world to others. We always have to use some means, words, images, actions. Between me and the other, there is always an infinite chasm, an ontological barrier. This kind of loneliness can't be eliminated, because it reflects the rules of the game, the reality of our existence. Now that we've recalled these 3 types, let's think in terms of solitude. What is it about? In many ways, it relates to the second, intrapersonal type. Because of our constant life in society and interaction with the environment, that is, with the collective, we simply don't have the time or opportunity to look within. The inner voice can only be heard in silence. It's always speaking, but we don't always listen. To be fair, we might simply be scared. The fear of the unknown kicks in instantly. Not being used to solitude, it's hard for us to begin this experience. Hollis writes, "If we are alone, but do not feel lonely, we are in solitude. It is fear that prevents us from this very important encounter with the self." This is a very important insight, In fact, the inner voice is the key to a successful crossing of the mountain pass. To put it in Jung's terms, instead of the ego-world axis we build in the first half of life, we must begin to construct the ego-self axis, or the ego in dialogue with our deeper self. This must be a dialogue that includes all parts of the personality, not just the selected ones. But what are these parts of the personality with which we have no dialogue? Let's reflect on that, because I believe it's key to understanding what can be done about it. The first set of blocked personality parts may be related to separation and loss. We're talking about events that were subjectively experienced as the loss of something important to you. This doesn't have to be an actual death or loss. The end of a life stage, leaving a family, divorce, or even marriage, all of this can be perceived as loss on a subjective level. In the first half of life, a person lives with the idea of their own uniqueness and belief in a final savior. In a broad sense, not necessarily a person, maybe just an idea. As Yalom rightly notes, these are good coping strategies to deal with the anxieties that come with existence. I'm different. This doesn't concern me. That happens to other people. My life will be different. Over time, these illusions are dissolved by external pressures. The realization that there is no final savior leads to the feeling of loneliness. But people are not immediately ready for this. An adult may be able to handle loneliness, but the child within us, present in each of us in some areas of life, cannot. In the first half of life, we spend a lot of time building it, creating a persona, the mask we show to the world. But when we are alone, we have to take off the mask. Yes, of course, even in adulthood, having lost our illusions, we can still suppress the problem with other strategies. A common strategy is seeking refuge in relationships, often resulting in codependency. The final savior in the form of a partner is the most relatable version. What this leads to, I think most people already know from popular psychology. Loneliness in midlife presents a challenge we can ignore for a while, but not avoid. So what can be done with all this? Strangely enough, there are some general elements we can talk about. Jung clearly defined the direction of movement, from the ego-world axis to the ego-self axis. We can begin by acknowledging our right to solitude. For example, set aside time daily, or at least several times a week, to be alone and reflect on your life. This can take any form: meditation, a walk, time in nature, or a glass of something. The main thing is that you are alone and not distracted by anything but yourself. Such an act symbolically initiates a dialogue between the ego and other parts of the self. Moreover, making time for it emphasizes how important this process is to you. Remember, in one episode, I ranted about how our actual and imagined priority pyramids don't match. We don't allocate time to what we say matters to us, as if it's not really important. It's time to fix that, and these moments of solitude are the first step. A second piece of advice comes from James Hollis. He suggests directly asking your inner child what might delight them. The inner child is not only or even mostly about immaturity. It's more about serenity, about what you would want without duties or obligations. It might be something that was forbidden or discouraged. It could be a long-forgotten hobby or something similar. The essence of this idea is that we must meet the needs not only of the ego, but of other parts of the self too. The inner child is a great example of such a part, and it holds so much life energy, enough to fuel a dozen adults, which is extremely relevant in crisis situations when vitality is low. A third idea is linked to the previous one, but with a different flavor. In the Star Wars universe, there are two opposing forces, Jedi and Sith, good and evil. Each has its own code that encapsulates its philosophy. The Sith code begins with, "Peace is a lie, there is only passion." This is the core idea: follow your passion. Just like a moth flies toward a flame, a person ignites with ideas and inspiration. With eyes lit up, one can move mountains. With enough inner motivation, anything is possible. But we don't always do what we're motivated for. The question is, why? Why don't we follow our passion? And what does it take to start doing so? What gives you passion? What makes you immerse in a process and forget all external distractions? After what actions do you feel truly fulfilled by something important to you? Why do this? Let me quote the full Sith code. Peace is a lie. There is only passion. Through passion, I gain strength. Through strength, I gain power. Through power, I gain victory. Through victory, my chains are broken. The Force shall free me. This can be rephrased into a maxim. Through passion, I can break the chains I've placed on myself throughout my life. So, follow it. I would like to end with a saying that Hollis quotes in his works. The only cure for loneliness is solitude. This was the podcast, There Is No Spoon. Until next time.